Begin the current Daf, Masechet Rosh Hashanah Daf Tezvav, begin 11 lines down with the top of the Amud. We will continue on this theme regarding Esrog, which we discussed regarding the Rosh Hashanah of Esrog. What's considered its year? We had this machlekes. We compare it to Elon, we compare it to Yerakis, and we continue on that theme. Today's Daf. So I'm just going to discuss in today's Daf are how we determine the Einus Meiser for an Esrog. Like, again, what's the season of an Esrog, whether we follow the time of the picking or the growing. The halacha that comes up today's Daf is Bir Shemitah. So halacha of Bir is that in a certain time in the Shemitah year, one has to go ahead and get rid of it. Machlekes shouldn't know exactly what, but one has to go ahead and get rid of it at certain time. That's a important halacha is going to come up in today's Daf. So, like we said in the previous Daf, we had mentioned Machlekes Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer regarding Esrog. What's the halacha? Rabbi Gamliel said Esrog is similar to a tree in three ways: Arle, Revai, and Shvius, which goes based on Chanata. But a Yerik in one way, what's called Shabbos Shas Likitasi Isur, when you actually pick it, that's when the Meister Blazer says no, it's like an Elon L'chol Davar. Now that's our Gemara continues. So like we said, essentially we have this machlekes. We actually have many charts, but it's not uploaded now. Between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Gamliel regarding what do you do with Meister and Shvius are going to be different, and we're going to find many differences, and that's going to be a big theme of today's Daf regarding how to fine tune exactly what it qualified. Rabbi Eliezer says that everything goes based on Chanata, Meis, and Shvius. And Gamliel says, no, for Meises, Likita, and Shvius is going to go Basa Chanata. So that's where we begin 11 lines down at the top of the Amud. Says, Esrog, which was the theme we just mentioned on the previous Daf on the top of this Amud. What's the Rosh Hashanah of Esrog? So Amalei, as we had answered, that even in according to Gamliel, we said that it's Shvat. So although we said that when you actually pick it, the Meister is going to go that for when you pick it like a Yerik, but even so, we still consider the Esrog tree as a tree, and the Rosh Hashanah is going to be Shvat. Now, I think that's an interesting question. Shvat Chadashim, there's when you go with the seasons, the months, you could go based on the lunar or the solar. So are we going based on Shvat of months, like we do when we call Shvat, we usually mean that of the Levana, but Shvat the Tkufa. There's different, it's called, we mentioned in the previous Daf, Tkufas Tevis, which is the winter season, right? We know there's 4 seasons, and they're also called based on our Hebrew words of Shvat and Tevis and Nis, and they're called Kufas also. So is it maybe the Shvat of the solar of the seasons, which is actually Rashi is after 30 days after Kufas Tevis, it starts the Shvat of the solar Shvat. Now the reason why we would think so, as Taisa explains, even though the ripening, the reason why the Gemara is entertaining is because there's a pasuk in Devarim Lamed Gimel at the end of the Torah that says Mimeged Tfur Shemesh. So it sounds like the ripening of the produce is actually from the sun. So it would sound like that the trees Rosh Hashanah should be based on the solar year. That's why we're asking, is it Shvat Tkufa? Which Amalei says no, the Chadashim, which Taisa says yes, because the reason why we're saying it's that of the months, because it also says Mimeged Gerish Yerachim. It also ripens also relating to the moon, and also the Jewish people count from the moon. Therefore, when we're saying Shvat, it's going to be Shvat that we know, what we call Shvat, that of the months based on the lunar year. Now, related, some say that, and that's why we're saying this, because we just said a question that Rabbi Yechon asked Rabbi Yanai. So we continue in another question. What if it was a leap year, like this year? What's the halacha? When's the Rosh Hashanah of the tree? Do we say it's Shvat that's near to Tevis? Or maybe Adar Rishon, which really Be'etzim is taking the place of Shvat, because it's the month before Adar Sheni, which is the primary Adar. So in a leap year, when do you say, is it the 11th month? And if it's the 11th month, then it should be Adar Rishon, it should be Shvat, or is it the month before the last one, which would be Adar Rishon? So Amalei says, Halach HaCharev, you go after most years, whichever one is called Shvat. Even in a leap year, it's not going to be Adar Rishon, which is the penultimate month, which Shvat usually is. It's going to be Shvat, which is going to be before the Adar. Now, continue on this theme about Esrog.
How do we know that it means Shvat? The Rosh Hashanah is always the 11th month.
Right, no, right.
Well, the one month before.
Right, what does the word Acharev Shana mean? Right. Rashi says, you're right, Rashi says Misha Shmei Shvat, meaning we say most years, it's Shvat, so even in a leap year, it's also going to be Shvat. But you're saying that maybe you could read the word Halach HaCharev Shanim, that it should be the 11th. Well, the 11th, it is going to be 11th. Shvat is 11th. It's just the second to the last one. Adar Rishon is the second to the last one, which Shvat usually is the second to the last one. But that's what he's saying. Halach HaCharev Shanim, most years it's Shvat, it's going to continue to be Shvat also now. Now, the Gemara continues on Esrog. Amar Rabba. It says, Esrog Bas Shishas. and this is from the theme of the previous stuff. If let's say you have an esrog that started budding in the 6th year, shenichnas l'shvius, and now it's entered into the 7th year, into the Shemitah year. So Rabbi says like this. He says, "Petur min ha-meiser," and the Gemara is going to explain his whole statement and the next statement as we go along. But just to translate what the words are, Petur min ha-meiser, it's going to be exempt from meiser. Why is it going to be exempt from meiser? Because esrig, obviously because on some level it's in the Shemitah year. But it's going to be exempt from the laws of beer, which beer is when you have Shemitah produce and let's say there's no more food available to the wild animals anymore, you have to get rid of it. You have to put it into the street, which it seems to be a contradiction, obviously, because if you putter from meiser, because obviously considering a Shemitah produce, then why would it be putter from beer? But okay, we'll discuss that in a moment. Same thing, just a year later. If the chanata happened in the Shemitah year, and that's going to the 8th year, so betur b'meiser, it's exempt from meiser, which obviously you're considering it based on chanata again, this is all very difficult, as we'll explain, but it's patur from meiser, as if it was from the Shemitah year, from when you had chanata. And it's going to be chayiv in beer, again, because you're considering it as from the Shemitah year, which that's when the chanata happened, which you're going to require beer. Okay, that was what Rabbi said. Now, only Abaye finds this difficult, but he says like this, says, Bishlam is safe. He says, I understand there was 2 cases you spoke about. You spoke about 6th going to the 7th, and 7th going to the 8th. So he says, the second case you spoke about, of the 7th going to the 8th, I understand why you said that it's pater from meiser. Why? Because obviously you're giving it Shemitah sanctity, and you have to go ahead and be mafkirit, like all Shemitah produce, and something that's hefker is pater from meiser. Why? Because it sounds like that you're going based on chanata regarding the halachas of, now has the halach of hefker of the Shemitah year. And therefore also regarding beer is the same thing. It's going to be chayv in beer because you're considering it as a Shemitah produce, the esrog tree based on the chanata when it ripened. Now, although really this whole second case, even though it contradicts the first case that you spoke about, Rabbah, that when it was the 6th year going to the 7th year, you told me that it's going to be pater from meiser because it's hefker, because it's considered Shemitah produce. Obviously, from the first case, you're considering you go based on Likita, that when you pick it, which is in the 7th year. Because if you're not treating it as Shemitah produce, then you wouldn't be exempt from meiser. It's only because the hefker of the Shemitah year exempts it from meiser, as our Brisa teaches in the Chilta. It says in the pasuk regarding the Shemitah year, and it says that the poor of your people are going to eat it, and you're going to take truma, teichel chayis asada, and the yisrim, and the leftover teichel chayis asada, the wild animals are going to eat, which teaches us just like a wild animal eats and is exempt from taking meiser, so to a person is exempt because it's free for everyone. So your whole second case contradicts your whole first case, because the second case is talking like as if you go based on chanata. The first case is sounding like that you go based on Likita. So Abaye Teich Devarav in between the lines is saying that I wouldn't be bothered by, because I would say that was a doubt that you had. You didn't know if you go by an esrog tree after Chanata regarding the laws of Shemitah, or do you go based on Likita like you do by Meiser. So you went l'chumra. You went stringently. And the reason why you go stringently, because the laws of Shemitah are biblical, and the stuff is l'chumra. So therefore you went like both, l'chumra, to treat 6th into 7th, or 7th into 8th, that produce as Shemitah produce, and therefore it's hefker, and therefore it's going to be pater from meiser in both cases, because it's hefker. So that I'm okay with, said Abaye. I'm okay with the fact that the second case is not contradicting the first case, because even though one is indicating you hold chanata and one's holding that you hold regarding Shemitah as Likita, okay, you didn't know, so you machmer. But my difficulty is like this: Ilaresha. The first case that you ended off by saying, which was the 6th going into the 7th year, that you told me Petur min beer, that was from the 6th going to the 7th year, you're going to be exempt from beer, that you don't have to liquidate the produce and get rid of it, which is a leniency. Am I? Why? Obviously, because the meaning you say zil basachanata, that you go based on when it starts to bud, which was in the 6th year. Oh, from there you could see that no, you weren't in doubt. And the conclusion of the first case and all of the second case is all the same reason. It was obvious to you that you go based on chanata. That's obviously, because if you had a doubt, then you can't be lenient and tell me there's no beer. Out of a chumrah, you should have said that there is beer of 6 going to 7th year, because maybe you go based on Lakita. No. Obviously you knew that you go based on chanata. And 6 going to 7, since the chanata happened in the 6th year, it's going to be exempt from beer. Oh, but that's my question, says Abai. If that's the case, that you were not in doubt, and you don't treat the estrog coming from the 6th into the 7th year as Shemitah at all, so the Chai b'Meiser. Then should be obligated Meiser, because it's not Hefker, because it's not 7th year produce. It doesn't go based on the Kita. It goes based on Chanata. So if you go based on Chanata, like the Seifa case describes, and part of the Reisha also does, then why are you saying that's going to be part of a Meiser? So Malay, so Rabbi says, good question, but you're right. Although this produce this estrog going from the 6th to the 7th year is not obligated to be mafgrid, because you're right, I go based on Chanota and it does not really have the halachas of Shemitah on it, but ultimately, go into Eretz Yisrael in the Shemitah year, all the fields and all the orchards, they're all hefker on the Shemitah year. And this one estrog tree that happened to have started budding in the 6th year is not going to be protected on its own, and therefore by default, Yad HaKol Mamash Meshabah. Everybody's touching it, and therefore they're treating it like hefker. And since it is ownerless, hefker, even if it halachically didn't require, if someone was mafker or something, it's a zem for meiser. You're saying it should be obligated meiser? How could I? Everyone's taking whatever they want. It's hefker. And hefker is part of a meiser, that's what you mean part of meiser. Although really halachically shouldn't require, because it's not really shemitah produce, but it's hefker. And hefker is going to be exempt from meiser. That is Rabba's opinion. Rabnuna Amar, he disagrees on Rabba. He says, says that if, let's say, it's the 6th year Esther going into the 7th year, says that truth is, we're always going to treat it as the 6th year. What do you mean always? This is what he disagrees on Rabba. He says it is going to be chayv meiser, because since you agree that it does not really have the halacha of Shemitah on it, it's not what's called hefker de malka. Hashem's not making hefker, meaning Shemitah year, Hashem's making the produce hefker. But the fact that everyone is touching it, that's just stealing. That's not a hefker that would exempt you from meiser. And therefore Rav Nuna disagrees, and he says, no, you're going to be chayiv on the meiser from the 6th going to the 7th year. Oh, bashvis and nechnes l'shminis, and when it's from the 7th year going to the 8th year, la'olam shvias, you're always going to treat it as the 7th year, which Rabba agreed to that too, that you're going to go based on chanata, which therefore we're going to treat it as shemitah produce, because it had already bud in the 7th year. That is the machlekes Rabba and Rav Nuna. They're basically the same. The one machlekes they had was regarding the case of shishas going into shvias. Do we consider it being chayv meiser because it really had the chanata in the 6th year, or like Rabba said a chiddush, you don't have to really, but ultimately everyone's treating it as hefker, so it's going to be part of a meiser. But meiser, they want to ask on both of them from the following brisa. Shimon Yudam and Meshumim Shimon, he says, estrik bas shishas. If you have an estrik from the 6th year, shenechneses l'shvias that went into the 7th year, petur min meiser. So that's like Rabba. That's not like Rav Nuna. Saying when they go from the 6th to the 7th year, that estrik tree is going to be exempt from meiser, because Rav Nuna said you're going to be chayiv. Rabba said you're part. U'petur min beer, also exempt from beer. Why? Because you cannot have something being chayiv and meiser. Elam can gadol b'chiv, v'nilka b'chiv. It has to be that it grew in the obligated state and that it was gathered in the obligated state. Which Rashi explains, he's coming to give a reason why it's exempt from meiser, because you're really excluding it from the category of other trees, which would basically go on chanata. And if you're going based on the chanata, then it should be chayiv and meiser, because the chanata happened in the 6th year. So if you had to give a reason to explain, which is really saying like Rabbah, that even though really Hashem is not making it hefker because it's really not shemitah produce, it's really 6th year produce, but since ultimately the end of the day everyone's touching it, so it's going to be pater from meiser, because it's not giving me the reason of why it's pater from beer. That the Brisa didn't have to say the reason, because that's not excluding it, the estrik tree, from all other trees, because you go based on chanata. So of course you're not going to have a halacha of beer, because that would only be for shemitah produce, and this is not shemitah produce, it's from the 6th year. Now, what's what it says the Reb Shimon Yehuda in the name of Reb Shimon of Bas Shvish and Echnesos L'Shminas? The next case, let's say it's from the 7th year going into the 8th year, which means the Chanata happened in the 7th and L'Kita was in the 8th year. So Betumin Meiser, it's going to be exempt from Meiser, because it's the Chanata happened in the Shemitah year. Upetur min abiyur, and exempt from beer. Now that's not like either one of them. They both said they would have beer because it's Shemitah produce. So that has to be liquidated if there's no more available for the wild animals. But Reb Shimon says no. You're exempt from beer. You know why? Because you don't have anything that's obligated in beer. Elam can gadol b'shviyas, b'nilka b'shviyas. Only if it grew in the Shemitah year and this is the kicker, that the gathering was in the 7th year. Which, as Rashi explains here also, it's giving the reason of why it's exempt from beer. And the reason is because it wasn't gathered in the Shemitah year. Now, because to tell me why you're exempt from Meiser, that we don't have to say the reason, because you already told me the reason in the first case, that the Chacham don't make you obligated Meiser unless it grew and gathered in the state of Chiyuv. And here, although let's say it was gathered in the post Shemitah year, which would make you Chayiv a Meiser, but it didn't grow in the state of Chiyuv because it grew in the Shemitah year. So that obviously we knew why you're not going to be Chayiv a Meiser. Question is why you put it from beer. So the reason why you put it from beer is because although it grew in the Shemitah year, but it wasn't nilkat in the Shemitah year. Well, one thing says the Gemara, well,
He obviously was nilkat b'shviyas.
it was not nilkat b'shviyas. We're saying it went from the 7th year into the 8th year. It grew in the 7th year, but it was gathered in the 8th year. So that's what we're saying, that you can be potter from beer, even though it's really Shemitah produce, because it can't only grow in the Shemitah year, it also has to be nilkat b'shviyas. But one thing says the Gemara is that Reisha, we already pointed this out, from the first case of when it was the 6th going to the 7th, that we said that such produce can be potter from Meiser. Well, that we said is Kasha Rav Nuna, because he said you're Chayv Meiser because the Chanot happened in the 6th year, so it can be Chayv. That's difficult on him. But Seifa, which said when you're going from the 7th to the 8th year, you can be potter from beer, is Kasha Ben Ladav Ben Rav Nuna. Is difficult in both of those Amaram. Where both of them had said, Rashi just points out that we said that it has to, for the laws of beer, it has to be grown in the 7th year, and also gathered in the 7th year, because when it says in the pasuk, which that's the source where we learn on beer that has to be available for the wild animals too, that was in the 7th year and not in the 8th year, and therefore it has to be both grown and harvested in the 7th year. But now at this point, the Gemara is saying that it's difficult both according to Rabbah and Rav Nuna, because both of them hold that we go based on when the Chanata happened for the laws of Shemitah. Now, if it's the 7th year going to the 8th year, they all held that would be Chayv and beer, because as Rashi points out, this that Rav Nuna disagreed with Rabbah was only on one point, from the 6th year going into the 7th year, regarding if it's Chayv and Mais or not. But everyone agrees if it's Chanat in the 7th year and then it goes into the 8th year, they go based on Chanat like a regular tree, and therefore it should have the laws of Shemitah. For beer, this Reb Shimon seems to be not like that, where she comes up with this Chiddush, has to be not only Godel B'chiv, it has to also be the Lekita B'chiv, but none of the Amaram said that, so this Tana seems to be not like them. So it says the Gemara, you're right, but Tanai, it's a Machlekes Tanaim. This Tana, Reb Shimon disagrees on them, but there's another Tana that we're going to show and illustrate as we turn to Amud Beis, that holds that when you have the 7th going to the 8th, we're going to go based on the Chanata, like Rabbi Rav Nuna hold, and it's going to be Chayv and beer. Where do we find this? The time to learn the Brisa. There's many different opinions. That's why all our charts, which we have, it's just not available right now, it shows all these different opinions because it gets a little bit complicated. But the main theme we could follow. Amar Rabbi Yisi, he says, Avtomas testified Mishum Chamisha Zekanim in the name of 5 elders. What did he testify? That Esrig, when it comes to Esrig tree, Achad Likitasa, we go based on when it's gathered, which is like the laws of Yerek, is Lamaisa for the laws of tithing. But our rabbis, they made a head count in Usha, and they came out with the following conclusion. We go for Esrig tree, Achad Likitasa, after when you gather it, Bein Lamaiser and Bein Lashis. Not only the laws of Maiser, but also the laws of Shemitah, that you go based on Likita. Now, first the Gemara asks, well, Shvi's Man Kashmei, who mentioned anything about Shemitah, that you're saying that the rabbis made a count, obviously like as if there was a dispute over here. Who mentioned anything about Shemitah? At the Tanakama over here of Rabbi Yisi is not. He didn't say anything about Shemitah. So it's continued in Beis. So the Gemara says you're right, but Chesur Mechser, the word's missing. Nachitan, this is what it's supposed to say by the Tanakama / the 5 elders. Esrig, when it comes to the Esrig tree, Achal Lekitase Lamaisa. For the laws of Meiser, and that's what they only spoke about, because only over there do we go based on Lakita. But the Acha Chanata L'Shvias, but we go based on when it starts to bud for the laws of the Shemitah year. So this is what we said is like Rabbi Rav Nuna. these 5 elders, this Tanakama, this Rabbi Yossi, is saying that we go based on Chanata for the Shemitah year. So that's regarding the. So when you say regarding Lakita, you go based on Maisa. That's regarding obviously only the new or the old, or regarding second year, going to third year, or third year going to fourth year. But regarding the Shemitah year, we're going to go based on Chanata. Whether it's for the fact that we're going to consider half or whether, and this was the halacha that we had to point out, that we have a Tana like Rabbi Nuna for beer, like all other trees. So when you have a 7th year tree going into the 8th year, yes, it's considered as hefka, which can exempt you from meiser, because didn't you say you go after lakita for meiser? That's what Rashi is coming to address. That no, regarding the laws of meiser by other years of the Shemitah cycle, that's where the Rabbanan go after lakita, regarding old and new, meaning it's 1 year on another year, or meiser sheni meiser ani, and the reason is, like we said, because it grows al kol mayim like a yerek, as like we said, the first sugi in Kedushin of Gimel Alpha explains. But regarding all other things, it's similar to a tree, which would go based on the Chanata, and the same thing would be regarding that of the laws of Shemitah. So Rabbi Amnuna hold like this of Thomas, that says this testimony, that says that for the laws of Shemitah, go based on Chanata. So when it's the 7th year going into the 8th year, you're going to be chayiv in beer. Not like Rabbi Shimon, who says you can be part of in beer because the Lakita wasn't in the 7th year. And the 6th year going into the 7th year, there's going to be part of in beer because, like we said, you go based on Chanata. The only machlokes Rabbi Nuna had was in this opinion of Thomas. Rabbi Nuna held that since it's pater from beer when it's the 6th year going to the 7th year, because it's not considered Shemitah produce, it's considered from the 6th year, it's Michai v'Maiser, because Hashem wasn't mafka that produce, not Shemitah produce. Rabbi held that no, since at the end of the day everyone's touching it, and Thomas would agree that it's essentially hefker, and that it's going to be part of a Maiser. But for Rabbi Seinu Nim Nebuusha, but the rabbis, they counted a notion, they said, no, you go based on Lakita, Bein Lamaiser, Bein L'Shvis, even the laws of Shemitah, which is like Reb Shimon, that we said that you go based on, well, not really like Reb Shimon, but at least in that idea that the Lakita will be the significant part for the laws of Shemitah, which is not like the Tanakama and Brak upon him, although we had a difficulty from Reb Shimon on Rabbi Nuna, but we did find that this of Thomas is saying like them, that says for Shemitah you go based on Chanata. And therefore, yes, it will be Chayv and beer, not like Reb Shimon. Okay, continuing with Itmar, with this opinion of Rav Nuna, Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Shloimy, they both say, Esrig Bashishas, if you have an Esrig that the Chanata, the budding started in the 6th year, Shenech Nasa L'Shvis, that went into the Shemitah year, La'ilam Shishas, we're going to treat it in totality like it's from the 6th year, which that's like Rav Nuna, who holds that, yes, you can be potter from beer because it's not Shemitah produce, and you also be Chayv and Maisa, that's not like Rabba, who said that it would be potter from Maisa. And Kiyosa Rabban, when Rabban came, he said in the Rebbechanan, Esrik Bashishas and Nechnas L'Shvis, we have Esrik from the 6th year, is going into the 7th year. I feel like Kazait, even in the 6th year, it only grew very little, like the size of an olive. But and Benas's Kika, and then in the 7th year, most of its growth happened in the Shemitah year until it became like the size of a loaf. Doesn't make a difference. Chayav Alam B'Shem Tebel, you're going to be obligated for untyped produce, meaning we're going to consider it Chayv and Meiser from the 6th year, because we go based on the Chanata, which already happened in the 6th year. We're not going to treat it as the Shemitah produce, even though most of the growth happened in the Shemitah year. Now, continuing on this theme regarding a tree, we go based on Chanata. So, Tamar will learn the Braisa. Elon Shachantu Peidoisev Kodim Tu B'Shvat. We have a tree that its produce had already started to bud before Tu B'Shvat. So, Masas L'Shana Shavra. So, the Meiser is going to be from the previous year, because we said that the Rosh Hashanah for a tree is Tu B'Shvat. So, if it already had Chanata, which that qualifies it, that's the year that it was counted from. After Tu B'Shvat, let's say the Chanata happened after Tu B'Shvat. So, Masas L'Shana Haba. So, the Meiser is going to be for the coming year. However, the Gemara qualifies this very important qualification. Amr Nechem, he says, "B'medbrim, when do we say this? Is be'ilan sha'oisish te breches b'shana." When we have a tree that makes 2 breches. A brecha is like, which actually is going to be the Gemara's question. Shtei breches like a daitach, because a beirech is like sure, actually that's a good word for that translation what it means, but it's like it's a nest. Basically, it's a terminology by birds, as Mishnah teaches in Baba Basna Peyam and Aleph. If someone buys the peiros, meaning the birds of a shevach or a dovkad, so the first brecha has a different halacha, but basically it's like forgetting the word. But basically, it's like what? Broods. Right. Yeah. So meaning it's like the. That's such a great word. It's like the first like the first birds that come out. But the question is that the terminology doesn't make sense. So the Gemara says, "I rather say ke'ein shtei breches," meaning it's like two breches. Meaning, what it means to say essentially is that it doesn't develop its fruits by birds. It's called breches, but it wouldn't apply over here. But it's like two breches, meaning that the fruits are not finished at one time. For example, figs, as the Gemara said in the Yigimon Beis, we had by Kitnius that we said oisin asun prochen prochen. We said that a little bit at a time. So that's what we said. If it doesn't finish at one time, so then we're going to go based on chanata, which that's all at the same time. But regarding a tree, that it so to speak makes one brecha, one brood, meaning that the payers are gathered in one shot. Kagoin, they call them, for example, like a date tree, v'zeisim and olives, which Taisa says really zeisim really doesn't apply over here because zeisim we actually go achar shlish and not after chanata, but it's just as an example that it develops at one time. The cherubim and carobs, so even though the chanata actually happened before Tu Bishvat, interesting, we're not going to go based on chanata, even though it's a tree. Actually, the mice is going to be in the coming year, meaning we're going to go based on the Lakita, because actually that is the primary. The only reason why we always said we go on Ilan Basa Chanata, which is a rabbinical meister, was because we wanted them to simplify it. But that's only necessary when it's going to be confusing because they're being gathered at different times. If they gathered at one time, yes, actually we're going to go based on the Lakita, even by a tree. And Amr B'Yechon actually says Nago Am B'Charub in Reb Nechemia. Actually, the custom of the people actually is like this teaching of Reb Nechemia by carobs, which Taisa says is not specifically carobs. Truth is, the kolim and zaysim and old trees that make brecha achas b'shana, even over there, they would follow and they would go based on the Lakita. They wouldn't go based on Chanata. Now, Shlokish has a difficulty on this statement of Rabbi Yechon from Mishnah Masechta Shvius. Mishnah says B'nai Shuach, which Taisa has a whole lengthy discussion, which seems to be many contradictions from Shas. If it was actually considered something inferior, actually considered superior, which Taisa says it could actually be both in a way that it could have been high quality, but from ownerless areas, so it was like a hefker type of thing. But be that as it may, in Boy Desire Davidam and Aleph, they explain that it's white figs, which actually Taisa says might be important because we actually just said figs are one type, and we're asking from figs. White figs might be different than regular figs, that it doesn't have the same status. But be that as it may, the Mishnah says Shvi Shalahan, its Shemitah year is Shnia. What's interesting, it's saying that its Shemitah year is actually the second year of the Shemitah cycle, as the reason is going to be explained. Why? Because what's interesting about this is that the produce of the B'nai Shuach, these white figs, the budding starts in the Shemitah year, but it doesn't finish production until 3 years later. That's how long it takes for them to actually finish maturing. It's only in the second year of the Shemitah cycle. That's these white figs. Now, we go based on Chanata, and therefore we're going to treat it as Shemitah produce in the second year of the Shemitah cycle. So that's considered still Shemitah produce, because although it's only being harvested then, but the Chanata happened 3 years ago, which from the Shemitah year. And therefore it's going to be forbidden as Shemitah. Now the difficulty is, wait a second, didn't you tell me that by trees you go based on when the Lakita is, not the Chanata? And that's why we have to say it's different than regular figs, because regular figs actually are not at the same time. It's actually more than one time. And actually then we said we do go basta Chanata. So that wouldn't be difficult. So that's what Taisa has to explain, but Taisa finds it difficult. Actually the B'nai Shuach have to be different. So it's like it's gathered at one time. So why going at Shemitah? We should go based on the Kita, the way Rav Nachman's teaching was. So how could you Rabbi Yochanan say that everyone's following Rav Nachman like Rav Nechemia when this Mishnah seems to contradict to Ishtak Rabbi Yochanan L'Salam? So only the Abba Kohen Rabbi Yisrael Kohen. So Abba Kohen says Rabbi Yisrael Kohen. Amay Ishtak was Rabbi Yochanan L'Salam. Lamely, why couldn't he just answer to Rosh Lakish? Aminu Lach Amno Rav Nechemia. I was telling Rav Nechemia. But Atamali Rabban, you tell me the Rabbanan. That Mishnah is the Rabbanan. Rav Nechemia obviously differs, and the people are following Rav Nechemia. So he answered, no, Rabbi Yochanan couldn't understand that. So not only because Rosh Lakish would tell him, Shavkes Rabban, you're leaving the Rabban, V'avik Rav Nechemia, you're doing like Nechemia? How could you go ahead? Which Taisa actually says he could have said it better. Rabbi Yochanan holds halacha is Stam Mishnah. This is a Stam Mishnah. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say that the people follow Rav Nechemia when you have a Stam Mishnah, you have the Rabbanan who say not like that? So, okay, you're right, he couldn't have responded like that. But he says, but why didn't Rabbi Yochanan answer? No, I'm just telling you what the people do. You tell me that it's forbidden, that you're not allowed to go ahead and go based on Lakita. I agree, it's usher. I agree, like you see in that Mishnah, go based on Chanata. But I'm just telling you that that's the minig. So why couldn't he answer that? Amalei says no, because then Rish Lakish would tell him, when there's a prohibition, because it's really Shemitah produce. Ki nagu, if that's the minig shavkina land, we think we let them. What type of an answer would that be? So you're right, Rabbi Yochanan couldn't respond that. But then he asked him, says, why couldn't he answer to Rish Lakish? No, when was I telling you that the people follow that they go based on the Lakita is Maisa Charuvin? Let's say the Maisa of carobs, which again, as Tais explained, doesn't mean specifically carobs, but all fruits of trees, Dirabon, which is rabbinic Maiser. You're telling me from the laws of Shemitah, which is this Mishnah you're asking on me from, that you see that you go based on Chanata, which is Deraisa, it's a biblical law. So, right, but biblical law, we're Machmer, we're all based on Chanata, but regarding rabbinic law, then we go based on Lakita. So that was a good question. This Rabbi Abba Cohen asked Rabbi Yisrael Cohen. So Elom Rabbi Abba Cohen. So rather Rabbi Abba Cohen says to Mahani, I wonder did Rish Lakish really say this to Rabbi Yochanan? Because what type of question is this? He could have said that I'm talking about Ma'aseh D'Rabbanan. He told me Shvi is D'Oraisa. So the Gemara wonders in Yeshiva if Rish Lakish said this. We have him. So that's what he told him. What do you mean if he? You wonder if he told him. It says no. Rather what he was saying was, I wonder im Kibla Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, we know the story when Rish Lakish asked this question, and Rabbi Yochanan was silent. So it says, what I wonder was Rabbi Yochanan, the reason why he was silent because he didn't know what to answer, because he held it was a good question Rish Lakish was answering it, or im loy kiblo, or if he didn't accept it. And the reason why he was silent because it didn't bother him, which was like what Rabbi Abba Cohen said, because you can't compare the maisa of Paris of a regular fruit tree, which rabbinic, to say that then we would go based on Lakita, to say that we have to be machmer, like we find that Mishnah regarding Shemitah, which that's biblical, and never go based on Chanata, and never machmer. And therefore it says, I wonder if Rabbi Yochanan was even bothered by this question or not, because of this question on Rish Lakish is a question, which is what are you asking from that Mishnah? Yes, they would go on Chanata because they're Reisa, here is D'Rabbanan, and maybe we would go based on Lakita, into any time for those things.